Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
At this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Patience. He's keyed up, ready to go. He can't wait. Just like to say that I've known this gentleman for at least, I think, 5 or 6 years or so, something like that. And, I think very highly of him. He's done a lot of service work, for the San Diego community and also at the regional level. And I think works a very, very good program for what I've seen. Has a lot to share with us in the way of experience, strength, and hope. Please give a very nice welcome for Joe, our first speaker.
My name is Joe, and I'm codependent. And the title of this conference is Practice These Principles in All Our Affairs. And I wanted to title my speech, The We that is in practicing all these principles, or practicing these principles in all our affairs. And had something written down here. Where did I write it? Oh, here we go. Then right after we say the 12th step, in another place you say, well, many of us exclaimed, what an order. I can't go through with it. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. Those principles being, of course, the 12 steps. We're not saints. The point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than perfection. I haven't heard that at all today. The patterns and characteristics of codependence, the chapter of how our spiritual dilemma and our personal adventures before and after make clear that 3 pertinent ideas: that we were codependent and could not manage our own lives, that probably no human power could have relieved our codependency, and that God could and would if he were sought. Now, I modified something from someplace else, but it's applicable because what's important for me in this program is that it's the we in how we practice these principles in all our affairs. And I'm hoping to go into some of the things that, in other words, how do I practice these principles where I work, with my family, with my friends, with strangers, in stressful situations, because I think a lot of us have stressful lives. And when things are going, how do I practice these principles with my sponsor or my sponsee? How do I practice these principles in meetings, my recovery meetings? And how do I practice these principles? Normally I do it through service. I wanted to first say that I've heard some people talk about how the traditions are the principles of these programs. The traditions support the principles of our program, in my opinion. They support us being able to work the 12 steps of Codependence Anonymous or whatever 12-step program that we've decided that we need to work. And one of the things that I've always thought that was really important, and what I found when I first came to CoDA was this, that when I first came to my first CoDA meeting, most of the people that were at the CoDA meeting had probably maximum 5 or 6 years in program. And what was amazing about them is that they hardly, if ever, read the traditions at the meeting. But there was enough medium time recovery at the meeting where the traditions were transparent. They were absolutely transparent in the meeting. So what happened was that the way that newcomers were treated when they came into the meeting is that they felt safe. And that's what I call the transparency of the traditions in a meeting. when a newcomer feels safe when they walk into a room and they know that they have found a place to say what their problem is, and they can hear it, and hear it in a loving sort of way. And I've always thought that that was critical. And I didn't start looking at or practicing the traditions for at least until I'd been in the program for 4 or 5 years. And the reason why is because I find that most people don't come into this program and in 6 months they start working the traditions, because they have to work the steps. I had to work the steps. And until I worked the steps, I couldn't think about how I could work or how I could follow the traditions. I just couldn't think about that, because I had a spiritual dilemma. And that spiritual dilemma was codependency. And I heard somebody say this in a meeting one time, and it blew my mind when they said, I quote, somebody in this room that I love, when they said, I was so relieved to find out that I wasn't crazy, I was codependent. And when I heard that person say that the first time, they blew my mind. They let me know that what happened, I didn't meet this person until I had been in this program several years. But that blew my mind, because I never realized, it was just another awakening that, hey, I am crazy, and when I'm codependent. But other people see my craziness, but they don't know that I'm codependent. Well, some do now, but they wish I wasn't. Like my family. So anyway, at work, how do I practice these traditions at work, or practice these principles? How I practice these principles is because, having had a spiritual awakening, whatever spiritual awakening I've had, how I practice that at work is to realize that every other person that I meet, whether I like them or not, is in my life to show me something, not about them, but to show me something about myself. That's what it's about. And if I'm so blind in the moment that I can't get over what it is that you're saying or doing, then that's no longer about you. It's about how I'm unable to see your spirituality. And at work, that's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing for me to do at work, to look at the receptionist, to realize she's not just there to answer the phones and type up memos and do that sort of thing. She's there, and she's not just there to work there. She's another spiritual being that's on a path, regardless of that. And for me, I need to figure out a way to remind myself of that. And in all my affairs. For family, I recently talked to some folks about, in my family, when I first told some folks in my family that I was codependent, I told my youngest brother, and I told him I was in Codependence Anonymous. And he says, who are you codependent on? You're not even in a relationship. And it cracked me up. I realized that there was a wall there. And that wall was part of my family that they weren't going to understand. And I've told people this too, that my mother thought that she saw some changes, but some of those changes kind of frightened her, because with her, okay, and in a loving sort of way. At first it wasn't very loving, but then it became loving, and there wasn't any harsh words. There were kind words, and they were the kinds of words that disarmed her agenda. And then what happened is, then she opened back up, and she loved me like a mother loves a son and loves their offspring. Where she was able to open back up to the unconditional love that mothers often have for their children, and not worried about how I was going to survive, that kind of motherly love. So she switched back into that other mode. So that's part of what this program has done for me. It allows me to do that. On a different note, I tell people that for my family, I practice what I call family anorexia. And that is, years ago, long before I came to CoDA, I used to talk about how a family, when your families are in ditches, almost all families are in muddy ditches. And most people that are in that muddy ditch, they're trying to get out of the muddy ditch. And if you start to get out, then one of your siblings or one of your other folks that are in your family, they're going to crawl over you trying to get out before you. Now, this is part of, for me, I never understood that. I just knew that that was how it works. It works that way. And I didn't know if it was, I used to think it was from jealousy. But really what it is about spirituality. And it isn't a competition. It's about, hey, you're getting something that I don't get. I'm going to pull you back down. That's the metaphor for it. So I can start an argument. If you're in my family, I can easily start the argument where I push all the buttons and I make you angry. And then now I get to forget that you're a spiritual being and you'll have absolutely zero concept that I'm one. I'm just the monster brother or whatever in the family. So I'm not able to practice that. I'm not able to practice that with my family. My family is still too good at pushing buttons, and especially my buttons. And I'm codependent. I hate saying this. I'm a guy. I hate saying that I'm more sensitive than other people that are around me. Okay? But I've been in meetings, in business meetings, where I felt a connection with other people, and tears came to my eyes, and people were looking at me like, oh, what a goofball. Okay? If they weren't questioning my sexuality, possibly. Okay? The fact of the matter is that this is the way that I was born, and it isn't. I do have my tuner works in different frequencies, and one of those different frequencies is that I am compelled by the spirituality of the people that are in this program and other 12-step programs too. I am compelled by that. I am drawn by that. I will tell you that I do not believe that the 12-step program is the only way to have a spiritual awakening. As I've heard many different teachers say, there are many paths, one God. And for me, God is a spiritual awakening. It's when I can connect with a power that's greater than myself. And so that's how, and that's what my 12th step work is about. That's my 12th step. That's my 12th step. It's constantly, it is about practicing these principles in all my affairs. With friends, I used to have friends, and almost all my friends were alcoholics. And it took me almost 5 years in Codependence Anonymous before I finally figured out why all my friends were alcoholics and all my old relationships were alcoholics. Why? And drug addicts. What was my problem? Well, my problem was I'm an alcoholic also. And I was covering up my alcoholism by always having relationships with people who were far worse off than I was. And that isn't alcoholism. That's codependency. And I heard that in an AA meeting when somebody said, I was sick long before I ever took my first drink, and I was going, oh my God, that's me. I never understood it. I was sick all my life. All my life I was sick until I got into these rooms at the age of 45. And I'm wondering why I got here so late. But I got here when I was supposed to. Okay, how do I practice these principles in all our affairs with strangers? I found that most of my life I was able to treat strangers better than I was able to treat friends. I never understood that. For the sponsor-sponsee relationship, practicing these principles, and that is for the sponsor, well, I have cheap advice, and that is get your sponsee to do something that's of service, because it's important, not lots of service, and making sure that they don't overdo the service, because I've heard sponsors, what they do is they throw their sponsees into the lion's den, as it were, because it's one thing to say, service work, it's the diamond lane to recovery. It's also the diamond lane to insanity if you don't have the recovery. Okay? And that's just cheap advice. But you know what? I had good boundaries when I came into this program. What I did was I helped set up chairs. I helped put chairs away. I helped make coffee. I helped clean up the coffee pots if the meeting had those kinds of things. Whenever there was a get-together, I helped set up the chairs, the tables, clean them up, mop the floor when it was all done. That was my service work, and that was the extent of my ability to commit to 12-step service work. What I didn't realize at the time was that during those first few years before I actually committed to real service work at a meeting or something like that, where, yes, I will show up and I will count the money every week, or I'll be the secretary and I'll open up the room every week and I will be there every week. I didn't realize that I was being of service before then. And part of that service was in the meeting. That sometimes what I found that the most important service work that's done is by somebody sharing their story. Because even being in this program, as long as I have, I hear newcomers come into the room and they have the cojones to talk about the things that still frighten me. And if I said it in a meeting, okay, then I would think, okay, everybody's thinking, boy, Joe's acting like a newcomer all over again. Well, I do. I do get to act like a newcomer every once in a while. I think we all do. I think we're all codependent. You know, that's part of the we. The we that I found so important. This is another part of the practicing these principles.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
I got a couple sections of the book. One of them is in the Newcomer's Handbook, and it's on fellowship. And it talks about codependents may get together for coffee, dinner, sharing, and or socializing after regular meetings. My first experience with that was I didn't socialize with codependents after a meeting for at least a year after that, because I went to lunch with about 7 or 8 other codependents. We ate, and then when there was about 3 of us left, and I was telling one of my what I call war stories, you know, where I'm angry, and I'm not telling you the story. I'm not retelling you the story. I'm reliving it, and you can see you can practically see me perspiring, you know, that kind of thing. And somebody turned around to me and said, Joe, you know, I don't mean to take your inventory, but why are you so angry? I never got so angry in my life. I have been angry so many times in my life, but I never saw red before that day. I saw red when this person asked me why I was so angry. I spent 2 weeks talking to sponsors, would-be sponsors, anybody that would take a phone call, complaining about why this person did that. It was the most amazing growth experience in my time in Codependence Anonymous, because I got to find out that, number one, it wasn't what that person said wasn't personal. I took it personal. They were right on the money. But I, like other codependents, am able to see your character defects much easier than I can see my own. And that is the reason I'm codependent. It's because I'm blind. And I need meetings to remind me of my blindness. And that's why I need you to remind me of my blindness. I have a girlfriend who constantly reminds me of my blindness. Okay? And I'm telling you this in a loving way. I love her very much. And the reason I love her is because she shows me my blindness. She has the nerve to tell me that you're blind in this area. And then I get to be upset or not. And I get to think about it. I always get a choice. I can tell you that before I would have never been able to have this kind of a relationship with anybody else in my life on any kind of level like this. I couldn't have relationships that could tolerate that kind of honesty. It came from Codependence Anonymous and from fellowship. The fellowship for me was one of the most important things that I found, and it's one of the best 12-step service things that we can do. Here's why. If you talk to somebody and say, would you like to get a cup of coffee or get a bite to eat after the meeting or before the next meeting, then that's an opportunity to engage in a relationship. I found this out. Most of you in this room, and I've said this probably 100 times, are crazier than most every one of my family members. You're crazier. You have an awareness around it, though, and that makes it different. And you have this, but I'm like you, and you're like me, and you remind me of it. My family doesn't. My family beats me up for it, okay? They knock me down for it. And when they think that they can get their way, they'll put me on a pedestal. They learned all the tools in our society about control and manipulation. And this step, the 12th step, is about finally saying, I've had a spiritual awakening, okay? although usually when I say it, I don't have it anymore. Once I go, yeah, I'm there. I don't. I'm in my head, and I'm admiring my spirituality. And that is a crazy place to be, okay? Before, I just used to aspire to it, and now I can admire it. It's an amazing thing. It says that although many opportunities for fellowship exist in CoDA, it is not considered a social club or a place to get dates. Well, you know, when I first came to CoDA, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking, you know, I will find, and I've heard other people say this, I'll find me a good codependent girlfriend. Okay? You know, you have to be careful what you ask for. I didn't get into another, while I was in CoDA, I didn't get into another relationship, an intimate type relationship for, I think, probably 4 years into the program. And my response to when things started getting rocky was not to, oh, she's going to cure me, because this woman was not going to cure me. You can trust me on that. Because the picker, you know, that good picker. Well, what I did was I went to more meetings. This woman drove me to more meetings. And I eventually ended up going to a meeting every day. And I literally, and some days you couldn't get a meeting, so I picked up 2 on Saturday, or sometimes 2 on Sunday. I wanted to make sure that I was going to the equivalent of a meeting every day. And at first I tried to do a 30 and 30, and I made like 28. And I was disappointed. And then I said, okay, I'll go for 90 and 90, and then I got like 87 or 88. And then I gave up on it. And then the next thing I figured out was, in a year, I had done 385 CoDA meetings. Back then, that was hard to do in San Diego. Okay? And then I started thinking, well, maybe I'm using CoDA as a crutch. I wasn't using CoDA as a crutch because I kept hearing my story over and over and over again, and I was working my program, and it was so important. This concept of a spiritual awakening is so critical that I find that most people don't understand that the newcomer gets the spiritual awakening just by showing up in the rooms and working step 1. That they get a spiritual awakening. We get a spiritual awakening all through these steps. For every step, we get a spiritual awakening. And for me, if I think that I'm only going to get a spiritual awakening and it's going to become some kind of a target date, well, I think I'll finish working my steps again by 2014, and then I'll be completely spiritually, I'll have my final spiritual awakening. I don't think it works that way. I have to work in this world. This world is crazy, and I'm always going to be involved with the crazy world, unless I find a great cave to somehow live in and kind of do it that way. I hate to keep saying this, but service work is so important. It truly is. And I think it's important for every CoDA member to realize that just any participation in any event at all is service work. It's service work. It's service work. Because we sometimes say things. How many of you have heard somebody tell you something and it had a profound impact on the way that you literally your life? Somebody said something and you had this, and you go, that was amazing. And then you talk to them about it 2 years later, 5 years later, and they go, I don't know what you're talking about. You're nuts. And of course, I'm not nuts. I'm codependent. But the thing is that you launched something. You know, you gave me a spiritual awakening. Most people do that. They give, it's a gift. They hand off the gift of a tiny spiritual awakening, and we take it, it's a little light, and we just coax that light, and we fuel it however we need to, and we do it for however long we need to, and we carry it for a long period of time, and we tell that person later on, look at the light that you gave me, and they go, what are you talking about? There's only doom and gloom and darkness. There ain't no such thing, and I wouldn't tell you any such crazy stuff. That actually happened to me. My mother told me before I was going back into the Army, she told me that she says, Joe, you are so unique and you are so beautiful on the inside, I don't think that anybody will be able to find and or understand it. And a light just turned on inside of me. I was tearing. And my mom thought probably that I was just because I was leaving. But it wasn't what it was about. I had a spiritual awakening in that moment. She told me that the value that I have goes far beyond just being her son, just doing well so that she'll be proud of me. She told me that I could make a difference to other people. It was the first time in my life anybody had actually told me that. This first time. That was back in 1985. It had a profound impact. I started looking at people in a completely different way. Many of us have spiritual awakenings long before we come into CoDA. We just don't realize it. We don't realize how important those things are. We don't, I find that I didn't. I mean, all of these things are like this, they're little steps that got me to the 12 steps. Because the 12 steps are just, they're the way that I see that as to create a spiritual awakening, you know. Excuse me, as one entertainer would say, I'm a little verklempt. I love this program, and I'm passionate about it sometimes, and I'm also compassionate about it, not as often as I could be. I have a few minutes left here. I could go light too. I have more here. I brought 4 things that I could remind myself. I was sitting in a CoDA meeting at a church the other day, and I don't normally like to mix religion and CoDA, but I saw something in there. It was a saying, well, it's like a little poem, and it starts with that I'm the radiant life of God, and I've been anti-God for most of my life. I don't know why. The word God just kind of got drilled into my head in a way that it was distasteful, and but now when I hear it, there's something about it that resonates with me, and it's about a higher power. And it's about something that dwells within me, and it dwells within you. And so now I've got a kinder and kind of a gentler way of looking at it. And in the second thing, it says, I'm a radiant light of God. I am. And I looked at it from the perspective of what happens when I'm being codependent. There's nothing but darkness. There is no radiant light. And there isn't a higher power that's working in my life. That's what happens. When there isn't a higher power working in my life, I have an impossible time being a radiant light. In other words, I can't bring to you what I'm missing. And that's what I get from CoDA meetings. In CoDA meetings, I actually get the opportunity to be quiet, listen, and it becomes meditative for me. In other words, I try to pay attention as much as I can. I try to pick the wheat from the chaff, as it were. I try to see where your drama is, and I try to see where your recovery is. And I used to grade it. There used to be a little chart about, well, you don't have very much recovery. But it's become far different than that, because I've come to a different place in my program, and that is that, that sense of equality, and that every person has recovery. Sometimes I hear somebody in a meeting say something that's really profound. And what happens after they say that something that's profound, you see the light. I call it the light. I see the light go on in a lot of other people that are around them. And the newcomer can see that light in the old-timer. And the old-timer will say something, and the newcomer will light up, because what they're doing is they're reflecting the recovery. They're reflecting that power that's greater than themselves back. And what the newcomer probably doesn't realize in that moment, it's their spiritual awakening. It has nothing to do with the guru standing in front of them. It has to do with that they're the student, and they have just had an awakening. But now they see the teacher or the sponsor. And what they don't realize is that it's happening within them. When I saw people having these aha moments, at first I thought it was them having the aha moments. And then one day I realized I had those aha moments when they talk about their aha moments, and they open up, and they shine a little light, and that I receive that light, and the little light inside of me ratchets up a little notch. But at first, I never saw that. I never saw that that was my recovery. Even when I was sick, when I first came into these, really sick, when I came into these rooms at first, and I had these aha moments, I thought it was about you. It wasn't about me. And now it is. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the 12th step. The 12th step is like, it's one of those things where acting as if doesn't work. In other words, I can't walk around. I mean, I can walk around and I can pretend that I have had the spiritual awakening, and I might be able to get people to buy it. The problem is that sooner or later, if it isn't real, then acting as if isn't going to make it. It isn't going to help anybody along the way. In other words, it needs to be the genuine experience. And a former spiritual teacher of mine put it in these words, kind of, sort of in these words. He put it this way. He says, when you come across a difficult situation and you need to ask yourself a question, the most important question always to ask is, what would love do next? Not what should I do to save my ass next, but what would love do next? And in difficult times, for me, that's the hard part. What would love do next? And I could tell you this, that a lot of times that I have the detachment that comes from this program that allows me to ask that question more frequently. Not all the time, but more frequently. And the one thing that I love about this program more than anything else is that I can still do many of the same things that I did before I came into Codependence Anonymous. Okay? I can help people. Before, I used to do it in an unsolicited sort of way. And I had an expectation that they were supposed to accept my help and love me for it. And now I can help them without an attachment to whatever the outcome is going to be. I don't expect that you have to love me because I helped you. I will ask you if you need help. And I will not just jump right in if you say no. Leave me alone or whatever, because I know that you need help. My codependency is still there. It's that the tools that I've gotten from this program allow me to have slightly different boundaries. That's what I call them, that allow me to look at situations that are in a more detached way. And so the question is, can I do the same things that I did before without the codependence? In other words, do they come from a loving place versus the control and manipulative place where, in other words, I'm doing this because, et cetera, I'm going to get ahead, you're going to think more of me, this, whatever the case might be. And so can I do it without that? And the answer for me now is more often than not. Okay? Is it perfect? No. This isn't a perfect program. And the steps are perfect. But the thing is that most of the people that are in it aren't. That includes me. And so the thing is that I don't claim anything close to spiritual perfection. It's progress, and that's all this is about. And I'm grateful that I was asked to speak tonight. I hope that I kind of stayed on topic, and I know that this is totally cool to be able to talk to a whole room full of people. Like there's like only a few empty chairs. And this is like totally awesome. And I'm glad you're all here. I was worried that this wasn't going to somehow pull off, and I wanted this conference to go really well, and it looks like we're off to an awesome start. And welcome everyone, and thank you for letting me share some of me. Ran the next segment of it came from sitting in meetings, and I didn't have that equality. I was able to set up really good boundaries. Well,
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.